What do Westmont, Harvard, Wake Forest, University of Arkansas all have in common? We'll get into that and so much more, all on today's Locked On Guardians.
Tanner Bobby the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Ellis edition of Locked On Guardians. On today's show, we're going to talk a little, I crunched some numbers. We're going to talk a little bit about the TV contract. This keeps coming up, so I just want to talk about why I think the Guardians are in ugly shape. Okay, I'll be honest about that. We're going to answer that question. The 5 worst first rounders get to the big leagues by Baseball Reference War. We're going to talk about some first rounders in general. And then we know this team loves the Cape and they love Cape performers. So we're going to get into some big names from the Cape. I should add Georgetown into that group of colleges that we'll be talking about on today's show as well. But for those who do not know me, first, I do want to take a moment actually and say, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com to get started today. I am Jeff Ellis, one of your two hosts of Locked On Guardians. Been here since I introduced baseball to the Locked On Network. Before that, I was a lead draft and prospect analyst. Can you tell? Draft with today's show over at Scout and 24/7. So let's talk about money. Cleveland listen, a lot of teams were willing to take 50% of what Bally's offered them because they knew this situation isn't going to go well with MLB. And why do we know that it is not going to go well with MLB hosting the TV? Because San Diego gave us a lot of information a year ago. San Diego is in a bad situation right now. If you missed it, they're looking to cut salary due to escalators in contracts, some of them being very quizzical contracts. They are up again for money. They are way too high. They're going to look to cut their payroll. But according to reports, last year, San Diego, now, I know the Plain Dealer released a thing saying, well, this new MLB thing, it's going to open up the Guardians to 4 million homes. That's great. The other side of this is San Diego last year with this same product had, at the start of the year, was reported as 40,000, and that by the end of the year was 45,400 paid subscribers. So I bring this up because if you look at that at $100 per subscriber, that's 4.5 million. Now, if we say that Major League Baseball takes none of that 4.5 million, gives it all to the teams, and then let's say that from advertising revenue, they double it, San Diego last year would have gotten $9 million in their TV contract. For those who don't remember, Cleveland was supposed to get 65. They got 55, I believe, last year, maybe 50 with a balancing out from MLB. Cleveland's metro area is about 2 million. San Diego's is 3.2. So if we sit there and crunch the math and, get the percentage, Cleveland's metro area is about 63% of San Diego's. So if we use that number, it drops Cleveland's subscriber base to closer to 30,000 people. I'm sorry, actually, it drops them closer to 28,602 subscribers using and this is saying taking that 45,400 and saying that was all year. That was $100. It was no one dropped in and out. That is a whole year. So now you're looking at 2.8 million. Again, if we have nothing coming out from Major League Baseball and we double that for advertising revenue, that gets you to 5.6 million. This is an issue. And this is where the haves and have-nots in baseball are just going to get worse and worse because, the Yankees are pretty bulletproof because they've had the YES Network for forever. And these larger television deals still exist for larger markets. Bally's was willing to renegotiate with multiple teams. Kansas City, Milwaukee. They did not view Cleveland as worth it. They did not view Cleveland as a market that was going to be anywhere near that $50 million investment. And, it's not a situation that is looking like it's going to be anything other than a disaster for this team where it is. Now, let's say instead of using the 2 million, we use the $4 million or the 4 million household number. Let's say we do it that way. So if I were to do 4 million, I actually didn't do this earlier, but I just want to do divided by the 3,276,208 as the metro area of San Diego. So that gets you at 1.22 times 445,400. That gets you to 55,429, which again, so that'd be 5.5 million, which again, if Major League Baseball takes nothing out and you give that and you assume double for advertising revenue, that gets you to 11 million. Now, supposedly they'll get 15 million from Major League Baseball from the collective bargaining fund. But this is a fancy way of saying if they get that full 15 million and you add it in and they get what's looking like, max 10 to 12 million, unless I don't understand TV, which is a very good possibility, you're looking at less than half of what they were supposed to get from the original Bally's contract. When you look at it that way, it's kind of amazing that they've spent at all. Yes, I know there are a lot of other positives and things coming in, and there's someone in our comments who keeps insisting they're at 400 million. There's no way they're 400 million in revenue. It's not the biggest park. It doesn't sell out at the highest rate. I did the monetary revenue on it, and the TV revenue is not there, and there's just no way it's happening. So I think it's important to keep talking about this. If you can get better data, please submit below. Tell me about it. But TV revenue for the last decade, the story has been like, well, talking about attendance doesn't really matter as much because TV revenue is really the driver. The problem is TV revenue is gone. TV revenue is up in smoke. And you're talking about $30 million difference. That's rather significant. San Diego had a $256 million payroll, and they had to take a $50 million loan from Major League Baseball to cover that when they had their old, really expensive TV contract. San Diego has to, and I know what you're saying. Hey, why can't Cleveland go up to maybe 130 or 140? Again, Cleveland is not as big as San Diego. Cleveland also your dollar goes further, which also means that, the things are not as expensive. The overall revenue stream is not as high in Cleveland as it is in San Diego. And then we have to discuss the elephant in the room of all this, which is I've been writing about the Guardians since 2007. And there has always been this undercurrent of anger with ownership, perceived spending, perceived, effort, perceived interest, all of these things. Cleveland is and there's just also people who seem to take a perverse pleasure in the baseball team not doing well because it has done well. There's always been this undercurrent of negativity towards the baseball side of things. San Diego has it easier. There are no sports to compete with. None at all. Chargers left. Were the Clippers once in San Diego? Was that what it was? Were the Clippers before? But they were one sport town. I don't know my geography well enough to talk about how close San Diego and San Jose are. I don't think it's all that close. But they have one sport. They have had, before they just had a beloved owner die a year ago who really invested in this team and was willing to lose money. There is none of that kind of undercurrent of negativity. There's also nothing competing with them for their dollars. So I keep bringing up San Diego because we have the information, because they were a year ago. And because even though they are bigger, even though, $100 in San Diego means less to a person living in San Diego than it does to Cleveland. Because that $100 just stretches more in Cleveland than it would there. I guess I could here. I'll pause. Let's see what the difference is. So the cost of living is 37% less in Cleveland compared to San Diego. So $100 means less in San Diego. They don't have anyone to compete against, and they don't have the level of anger and antagonism in a fan base because, again, beloved owner died. There's a weird situation going on there now, but it's still they don't have this years of anger and resentment tied in. Those are all the more reasons why they're going to have a bigger subscriber base than Cleveland. And I really look at all of this. I think this is a big concern. And I think, people call me an apologist, and that's fine. But it does feel like there's a degree of, maybe with last year and even more at this year, that this is where they're kind of baselining to see what they need to spend and what they have spent. in terms of the change in adjustments when you're looking at the overall salary structure for this team. I think we cannot talk about this enough in some regards because it's going to be drastic. It's going to be a big switch. Again, if I have something wrong, please tell me. I want to know this. I am not saying I am an economics major. I am not. But I think maybe the biggest story of this offseason aren't the trades. It's not, draft position or draft picks. It might be the drastic change in television money that is coming to the Cleveland Guardians. When we come back, I've got first round stuff to talk about, answer some of your questions, all on today's Locked On Guardians. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That doesn't always happen. That is why if you've been tempted to do FanDuel, now's the time. Sometimes it's only if you win. This is win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. Visit the web store to check out all of the things you can do, from, traditional to the non-traditional bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. Again, that is not how this always happens. Sometimes we get like 150 and it's only if you win. That is not now. Now it's $200 no matter what happens in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And we are back. So let's talk some history for people who are curious. Cleveland Guardians in the first round. It's we talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show. They have had in their franchise a grand total of 78 first round picks. Those are, the competitive balance picks. Those are compensation picks. That's how they can have had 78 players, 78 picks through, in less than 78 years. 42 of those players, 53% have made the big leagues for a total WAR of 350.6 WAR or 8.3 per major leaguer. If you're curious, the top 10 players by Baseball Reference WAR are Manny Ramirez at 69.3. Again, man, that's one of those things where I'm like, we almost need just a Hall of Fame of steroids wing and just I got to look and make sure there's not some off the field I don't know about with Manny outside of him being a knucklehead. But man, that 69.3, best first round of the history of this franchise. Number 2, CC Sabathia, who might make it in his first year. Frankie Lindor, 49.6. He's got a chance to pass them both before it's all said and done. And how stinky is that? Boston, Yankees, Mets. All the big market teams where these guys went to. The best number 2 overall pick in franchise history, Greg Swindell, comes in at number 2. One of the worst trades in franchise history. Don't go look that one up. That was a butcher of a trade. All these years later, it has not changed anything in terms of how bad that turned out when they moved on from him. Charles Nagy at 5. Jeremy Guthrie at 6. I talked earlier about some of the 2007 and what it was like. Jeremy Guthrie was often a complaint back then, as was Brandon Phillips. Guthrie, I still say you can't really blame this team for. He was atrocious in the minors. Kelly Gruber, during the old Rule 5 system when it was easier to take guys. Blue Jays popped him. That's unfortunate. He was a top 10 pick for the team. Ray Fosse. So we got 6, 7, 8. Drew Pomeranz at 9. He may not have worked out for Colorado, but he got there. And Rick Manning, 10th. Your 11th is Lonnie Chisenhall. Now, if we come down to the bad, I don't think anyone actually correctly guessed the 5 worst players. All of these players are at over -1 WAR, and I'll go in reverse order. David Huff. People sometimes say I like to pat myself on the back too much. I compared David Huff back when he was a prospect, when I was just beginning writing, to a pre-breakout Cliff Lee. Now, I said he was not going to be Cliff Lee, but I said that kind of solid, steady number 4 who could miss bats. I said that'd be David Huff. Not so much. That did not work out for me on any level. Next up, another lefty, Jeff Mutis, who was at Lafayette College. He was a guy that when I was a kid, I heard a lot about coming up. He was a 1988 first rounder. He was supposed to be one of those young arms that was going to lead the charge. None of them worked out. Tim Drew, the least successful Drew, comes in at 97, negative 2.3. And then you got, I don't know if you can say the worst second overall pick in franchise history, but I mean, I think you have to say it's Mark Lewis. The other side of this is the guy played in 902 games, Hamilton, Ohio kid, negative 2.6 WAR. It was not a great draft class back in 1988. Yes, they had 2 picks in the top 30, and both of them are the 5 lowest WAR in franchise history. That's not how you draw it up, but that's unfortunately how it happened. The first draft, I want to say, ever was 1965 with Ray Fosse. That worked out well. That was the 7th overall pick. 1966, they failed to sign John Curtis, who went on to have a pretty good career. And the third, 1967, they had the 11th overall pick, Jack Heidemann, least successful pick in franchise history, negative 6.2 WAR. He was a utility infielder, and what can I say about him other than he has a career OPS of 532. His slash line for his career, 211, 264, 268. He debuted as a 19-year-old. Was here for quite a few years, bounced around. Interesting player, interesting career. That much is for sure. So that's kind of the good and the bad of the first round when it came to Cleveland historically. The interesting thing is like just how quickly it falls off compared to some other teams. Like Manning as a second overall pick, that's not a great value. You could argue Pomeranz at 5th overall is not, but it's kind of okay. Like they're okay picks. But the number of high picks this team had, Paul Shuey is one. Corey Schneider is another one. Clint Frazier, these top 5 overall picks that did not turn into anything. Glenn Tufts, there's another fun one. But the other interesting side is this team was essentially wandering in the desert for 30 years. Little accountability in terms of its management, just bad for the 60s and 70s into the 80s. Just a rudderless franchise. You want to talk about just being a bad rudderless organization. In the 80s, they picked 10th, 13th, 12th, 11th, 4th, 9th, 2nd, and then that was the end of it. I know I made fun of Mutis and Lewis. In between those two, Charles Nagy at 17th overall. That one did kind of save that whole draft. And they didn't have a first rounder in 87, which is a pretty solid draft for them. But Swindell in 86, they got Nagy and Swindell in back-to-back drafts. Unfortunately, they didn't have them here at the exact same time. The other funny thing was in 85, they took Mike Pohl, who didn't make it to the big leagues, but they got to see a lot of Greg Swindell that year as they were teammates. But this team was just bad for a long time, which, people know, but it was not successful with the draft. And the other weird thing is, again, as bad as they were, they rarely bottomed out. They managed to be just competitive enough to hurt themselves, which was definitely a theme for baseball teams and Cleveland sports teams. It felt like when I was a kid in the 90s, and I was, before, when the Guardians had taken off at that point, when the Cavs were struggling through their Fratello years. And I only say struggling because they were good teams, but I don't know. I kept rooting for them to bottom out to actually get you wanted the special talent, right? You didn't want the solid 6 seed. It got a little tiresome. Or those Browns teams that, they're their own little story in the 90s before they decided to move out of town. But I kind of look at the history of the first round, and when you're looking at the team, it's just amazing how can I phrase this well? They've got some players who have a chance, but if you look back since 2000, their first rounders, Jeremy Guthrie. Well, he didn't do it here. He became a solid regular. Lonnie Chisenhall. Okay. Drew Pomeranz didn't do it here. Lindor was fantastic. That's your whole list of guys since the year 2000 who have a WAR over 6. And that's just kind of my cutoff zone for value. Like Tris McKenzie's at a 5. He has a chance to get there. But, Lindor, Pomeranz, Chisenhall, Guthrie. They just don't have a lot of guys. They have not, for all their successes. The first round actually has not yielded much. It has not given them even a lot of solid backup types, which is kind of weird to look at and consider. And, the last few draft classes, Lenny Torres, did he leave? He might have left as an undrafted, as a 6-year minor league free agent. I can't remember if he stuck around or if he left. They cut Ethan Hankins. No one picked him up. Daniel Espino, who knows? Tanner Burns, I don't think he's going to be there much longer. Carson Tucker didn't want to play baseball. Justin Campbell's never thrown a pitch. Chase DeLauder gets hurt every year. We got Gavin Williams. We got Bo Naylor. But they've taken a lot of weird risks, and that's where I'm kind of curious to see where this team goes. They have to have Bazana hit. They have to have DeLauder figure it out. They have to have Ralphie go. They can't keep having so little to show when this is a team that has to be successful via the draft. So comment below. Were you shocked? Were those names blasts from the past? Were those people that you did not expect to be on the good or the bad list? It's certainly something interesting to look at for a team where the draft has to be the lifeblood of their success. We're going to come back, and we know they love the Cape Cod League. Let's dive into who were the top performers this year on the Cape on today's Locked On Guardians. So I talked about all those college teams at the start. What do they have in common? This is your chance to guess below. If you guessed that those are where the top Cape performers for pitchers and strikeouts came from, you'd be right. Let's go. Well, let's first eliminate Blake Morningstar at Wake. He's not draft eligible. He's a 19-year-old kid who's tied for third in strikeouts. Barely pitched. Or no, he did pitch. I'm sorry. 29 innings last year at Wake. He's not the one who barely pitched. Missed a lot of bats. Also got hit a lot. Also gave up a lot of home runs. Also walked a lot of guys. Big Pennsylvania kid, interesting, but he's not eligible till 26. So let's look at some other players. Let's kind of work backwards from maybe least to know to most. Next up, Tate McGuire. This is your University of Arkansas player, and he's the guy who barely played. Pitched all of 1.2 innings last year. He's going to be a draft eligible sophomore. He'll turn 21 August 9th. That's far, close enough to the draft where he should be draft eligible. He's a Missouri kid who, let's see, I got too many tabs open, bane of my existence. He was tied with Morningstar and another pitcher for third most strikeouts in the Cape. And I bring this strikeout total thing up because historically the players who missed a lot of bats in the Cape, there was a few years there where that was like guaranteed that is a guy you need to watch. That is a guy whose stock is going to rise, they're breaking out. It's so important because we know that the Guardians value Cape performance. You're able to miss bats against the best of the best. That matters. So McGuire didn't pitch much. He is a 6'3" right-handed pitcher. Born in Kansas. Went to high school in Liberty, Missouri. Pitching at Arkansas. So little that you could actually see him perform. Who knows what's going to occur there? Maybe he could be a target as a late on day 2, day 3 guy. But just due to how they like to follow players, I think he's someone to pay close attention to. Let's talk about the other guy who was tied for third in strikeouts, and that's Sean Youngerman, who is a Westmont College in Santa Barbara. This year he's transferred to Oklahoma State. Before that, he was in high school at Chamain College Prep in West Hills, California. California kid. Will be 21 on July 9th, 6'3", 225 righty. Now, this player is someone to pay attention to. One, we know they have a rich history of mining California. They have a, excuse me, sorry about that. The downside to do a solo show is you just talk and talk and talk. But they have a rich history. California is one of those important states to them. I can't say the school name properly. That is a school with a very rich history. That's where Blake Rutherford went, who they were tied to in the past. Kevin Pillar went there. Like that, it's a school that is known. So he came from a good program. It is a starter at Westmont. He didn't miss the most bats. I mean, they were good numbers. It was a little interesting that when he moved, not interesting. When he moved from pen to starter, his strikeout per 9 went from 9.8 to 8.8, but his walk per 9 are low, which we know is important, 2.1, 1.9. On the Cape, he actually had his highest strikeout totals at 12. That's a high for him. His walk rate was also up to 3.6. And they have taken guys from Oklahoma State before. It's not always been a place that has seemed like the strongest developmental spot, but a lot of pitchers go there. And, some guys have step forward, some do not. I think it's okay for development. I don't think it's particularly good or particularly not, but it seems that kids go there. So there's at least a history of being able to get players there by the knowledge that they get kids drafted. He's a big kid, a righty. I don't have a ton about, his mix or what he's doing, but just in terms of what we see here, again, this isn't a first round guy. This may not even be a day 2 guy, but we know they're like Cape performers. We know they have gone to Oklahoma State in the past. California kid, all positives. Top 2 arms in terms of strikeouts. Let's talk Cody Bowker, 6'1" righty who was he had not as much last year. The year before that, he had 91 plate appearances. He played left field and center field for Georgetown. But much like we talked about Sean Youngman, Bowker is transferred to Nashville. He was someone they added. And while he didn't show it at Georgetown in that kind of dual role, he did miss more bats there. In the Cape, only a 1.8 walk per 9, 9.1 strikeouts per 9. He was really good on the Cape. He was an exceptional performer in his 35 innings, mostly as a starter. That's the type of guy they look for. And it's been a while. I'm trying to remember who the last player from Vanderbilt they took was. That was never necessarily their program that they went heavy in terms of, drafting from there, but they, it's a fine program. It's not one that has been all that successful. Mason Hickman in 2020, that's the last one. It has not quite paid off for guys coming out of Vanderbilt. The top 5 games played for an offensive guy: Dansby Swanson, Joey Cora, Harvey Hendrick, Pedro Alvarez, Brian Reynolds. You got Tony Kemp, Mike Yastrzemski are the next 2 spots on the list. It's not quite Virginia, but it's not a whole much, too many steps higher on that ladder. I think with him being a transfer, I think with, him having been, he was from Maine. Is that right? Isn't Emmy Maine? Doesn't have, he's from kind of not as big of a place when his baseball reference page doesn't have a high school on it. But yeah, here's this pitcher from Maine who is going to be a junior, who's going to Vanderbilt with some success. There's a lot of things to like, good command, slider. Just keep your eye on Cody Bowker. Again, more of a day 2, day 3 guy. And then I think the most Guardians guy is honestly the guy who missed the most at bats. And this is a pitcher that I was not familiar with before the Cape at all. And maybe someone will be like, oh, you should have known him. You're a fraud. And I'll be like, hey, that's fine. And that's Callan Fang, who is a relief pitcher at Harvard. And a few reasons to be fascinating. One, it's an Ivy League kid, and they have a history recently of drafting Ivy League kids. It's been a little up and down. We had Jay Driver from Harvard a few years ago, but they have gone for some performers from the Ivy League. 2, he has missed bats throughout his career. He was a reliever his first year and the starter last year. Not the strongest ERAs, but that's not really an evaluative stat, let's be honest. Doesn't walk a lot of guys. That is both true in the Cape and in terms of what he did at Harvard. In the Cape, he was a little home run prone as he was last year at Harvard. The thing I'll say is for the Guardians, that doesn't seem to be a bug. It's a feature. They'd rather have guys, and you can go back and listen to my interview of Hunter Gaddis, where I discussed this theory, where they seem to want guys who put the ball in the air because there's more likely to be, you're more likely to get an out with a ball that's up than one on the ground. You have more control over the one that's in the air. In terms of what his concentration at Harvard is, it's statistics. So that might be something they appreciate even more. Pennsylvania kid, so a cold weather arm, something they like as well. And, you got some bloodlines here. His dad is a Hall of Famer at Johns Hopkins for baseball. He's a member of the Johns Hopkins Hall of Fame, also a pitcher. So his dad was a 4-year pitcher at Johns Hopkins. I don't care who you are. If you're pitching at a D1, D2, or D3 school and you make the Hall of Fame, you know how to do what you're doing. Maybe didn't have the physicality or the traits to go any further, but I think that's still something impressive to make the Hall of Fame at Johns Hopkins, to be part of like the first team to make their Division II postseason run. So he came from a background with a dad who knew how to pitch, taught him how to pitch. And he's not a small kid. He's 6'3", 215. So just keep your eye here on Fang. They like smart pitchers. They like high-level Cape performers. There's a lot of benefits with this player. The one thing is he's going to be a little bit kind of older, like in the grand scheme. I mean, I don't even know if I want to say he's older. He'll be 22 in October. That's not really older, but like he's not necessarily young for the class. It's just with the shifting of the draft. Like I would have never said that was kind of an older birthday, but it's like, because nowadays it's like, if your birthday is any point in August, you're draft eligible. So it's those people with the early September or early September, October birthdays now just kind of feel like what I used to talk about for, other players. He's fine. Born in Pennsylvania, went to Pennsbury High School in Fairless, Pennsylvania, Fairless Hills. I have no idea where that is. They've not really produced anyone. Two names I don't know in terms of baseball. But led the league. And not only did he have the most strikeouts in the Cape, and again, we know how much they value the Cape. He had 39. He did that in 29 innings. Cody Bowker had 36 and 35 innings. So he did it in less innings. And, had one of the lowest whips, which again, not the greatest for evaluation, but just in terms of like showing performance level of anyone who would have qualified. He was highly successful. And we know this team values highly successful performers. Now I was focused mostly on pitching. And I've already talked about Ethan Petrie. I talked about him, and you can go back and look at my 2021 mock. I just want to talk about a few names that kind of jumped out at me in terms of performance offensively. I don't want to go too long on today's show, but let's talk about a name you have to know, a guy who I think is going to be a very easy first round grade. And let's talk about first, though, another under the radar player. And that's going to be Kane Kepley, who is going to be at UNC this year. He was at Liberty the last 2 years. As a matter of fact, he didn't really get recruited at high school. He was a walk-on, preferred walk-on, but still a walk-on at Liberty. Day one starter for them, walked 19 and 18% of the time, struck out 11 and 9%. We know that like walks don't translate, but it's better to have it than not. Stole a bunch of bases, had some good speed, and the Cape went out there this past year, and the batting average wasn't necessarily the highest, but his on-base skills are what really kind of got my attention in terms of the Cape. 244 batting average, but a 449 on base. He walked 38 times, which might have led the Cape. It did. Yeah. I mean, the next closest guy in walks, he averaged a walk a game. Next closest guy at 29. This guy, he's probably passive, but the upside is, in spite of those 38 walks, he only had 20 strikeouts. Like, he managed to defend the zone with a degree of passivity. Like, that's not often something we see. Often you're seeing someone this much higher, you would expect the strikeouts to be about 30. This is an interesting divide, especially for a guy who's going from Liberty to the level of competition he faced. Had 3 home runs, which isn't bad, in 6 doubles, so his slugging was okay. But just, some of the best on base skills, third highest OP on base percentage behind Ethan Petrie and Merrick Houston, 2 first rounders. 5'8" kid, played all over, stole some bases. I think he's just someone to pay attention to in terms of, that can't be. Did he really steal 21 bases in the Cape? I got to pull it. That is an unusually high number. So second best behind Nick Dumasel, and then the third highest amount we'll talk about in a moment on the show, but like second highest stolen base total. He's small, he's fast, he looks like he has pretty good contact skills, and also a strong eye at the plate. That all strikes me as very Cleveland Guardians-esque. He'll turn 21 on Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day to Kane Kepley. UNC lost a lot. I believe all 3 of their starting outfielders. So they have some openings. He's clearly going to start for them. I'm sure that is why he's going there. Just keep your eye on him. He is that like Tommy Hawk, middle of day 2 special that they have a history with. I'm kind of curious to see if I can talk to anyone to get a little more info in that range and area. But Kane Kepley is someone to watch. And then in terms of their first rounder, I don't know if this player is going to get there. I'm going to be very honest about that. But another player that stood out in the Cape is Ethan Conrad, who was at Marist last year, and then he's transferring to Wake. He's kind of their receiver king this year. He was just awesome in the Cape. He's a big, strong kid. There's great athletic traits. He's got some really good exit velocities from what I was told. And again, a guy who just stepped in the Cape. We said he's second, tied for third, or not tied. He's just third in the Cape with 19 stolen bases, 385 average. That's good enough for second behind Jaron Advincula, little brother of Jonah Advincula, who keep your eye on for 2026. I mean, this guy, the way he tore up the Cape as a freshman, is such a Guardians type of guy. Conrad didn't walk. That might be kind of the issue here, but he also didn't strike out. It's going to get me in trouble. I don't want to say he was I don't know if he had enough power to say he was the Cape's version this past year. He only had 2 home runs. I think he's got more power than that. See, I'm not going to do a bad comp here. I'm just going to say there's a lot of tools. This is a kid who I think is going to go in the top 30 picks, runs well. There's developing power, gets on base, knows, a good approach at the plate. I think I'm very curious to see what Ethan Conrad can do this year. And for those of you who are like power, again, Ethan Petrie, if he is available, makes too much sense for this team. Way high Aloe, the shortstop from Tennessee, had 8 home runs on the Cape, had a very good Cape. And, he had his 8 home runs and only 81 at-bats. So he had less at-bats than everyone else. The one concern is the 19 strikeouts to only 3 walks. You don't like to see that unbalance there. But, they do like up the middle talent. I'm not going to spend too much time on him now because I'd like to kind of dive into him later. And then, tied with Ethan Petrie was Ryder Helfrich, who is a player at Arkansas. And I don't think he is draft eligible. Yeah, he's not a draft eligible kid, I don't want to say. Last year, he was a 19-year-old freshman who, he got in a decent amount of games, had a really rough year. So maybe keep your eye on him as more of a potential breakout this past year. I didn't even get into, I think at some point I got to sit down and talk about Cade Bodine and some of these other players who had some big numbers in the Cape who, maybe we have not discussed as much. Ike Irish, I want to talk about. I think he's someone in that first round that could be considered for Cleveland. Irish, Petrie, Nick Dumasel. There's a lot of really interesting names who are Merrick Houston, who are high-level performers that I think Cleveland's going to be interested in. So I think you definitely kind of want to keep your ears peeled, your eyes open. Did I get those right or again reverse? To the show. I'll be covering the draft throughout, all the way leading up to it. And we just know they have put such weight on the Cape through the years that one of these guys I mentioned today, I almost want to guarantee someone I talked about today is going to end up in the draft class. When you just look at what they've done and the value they place on high-level performance against the best of the best, it matters. And one guy I mentioned today is going to end up in Cleveland, and one is going to end up with the White Sox, maybe more than that. But that is the bet I will make today. We'll see if I'm right. You can come back, and I don't know what the payoff will be. Maybe I'll have to do something silly on the show, or do like a ridiculously long live stream or what people want. But that is my guarantee, giving you a guarantee here in the cold days of January. Then I talked about someone today who the Cleveland Guardians are going to draft and who the Chicago White Sox are going to draft. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the content. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. Again, these solo shows, I'm kind of catering to you all. I'm hoping for the next solo show, though, to do a kind of a Q&A through the Cleveland Guardians Reddit. It's a great community. It's a strong community. We often, Justin and I both check in there to kind of see, what people are talking about, what people are thinking. So we're hoping to, I'm hoping to do kind of just a series of questions from there. We love engaging the community and all the various forums, all the great fans out there. As always, you're the most important part of the show. So let me know what you think. Drop a comment. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're not, we're doing that push for 4,000. Sign up for the Insider program if you have a few extra shekels and want to support the show in another way. Kind of gives you direct access to Justin and myself. He is better about it than I will be honest, but I'm doing what I can to make sure that I'm doing better with it too. But I want to thank you all for joining us. Remember to rate and review. Subscribe, tell a friend. We've had so many people talk about how they just discovered the show. There's always new people discovering, always new people finding out. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. And go Guardians, go.